Welcome, friends, wherever and whenever you are. I'm Alicia Sacred Heart. I'm your host for today, hosting Liba Waring Stambolian for her second presentation, or her third presentation in the Triple Goddess series. It is a new moon, and you will be sharing with us the goddess of death and rebirth. Thank you so much for being with us again, Liba. It's really an honor.
And it's always an honor for me to be with you guys. I love this community. There's a lot of passion for these stories, which I share with you. And yeah, it's great to find community that not only is in love with art and creation, but also in those forces that are behind creation. So I'm going to just dim this a tiny bit. There we go. I hope that's not too dark. That looks a little better. Okay, so for those of you who are coming in for the first time and have not seen the first two presentations, I just want to explain that what I'm looking at is this triple goddess archetype in relationship with a very ancient esoteric text. It's the most ancient Hebrew esoteric text. It was an oral tradition, so we don't know its date, but we hear about it in the Babylonian Talmud, which is right in the beginning of the Common Era. So we're talking about 2,000 years. So it's at least 2,000 years old because they were talking about it. They weren't actually giving you the text. We don't hear the actual text gets written down for the first time in the 10th century. And it's a very short text. And it's a text that speaks about creation and formation of our being, of the one that goes into the dream of you and me and goes through time and space. And I say that as a dream because the idea is that I am all, which means all time, all space, in all places at all time. But because of that, I can't have experience because I know all. So to have the revelation, to grow, I need to go into the mystery of you and me going through time and space. And so this creation and formation text is attributed to Abraham, who is also the patriarch of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And as we know, that creation story in Genesis puts the sacred feminine in the center of the fall, and her sacred tree and her sacred snake. And if you'll have to excuse me, my cat is flipping out. I have to crack the door.
Yeah, they can get mouthy sometimes.
Sorry, that is beyond like. So the Sefer Yetzirah tells a very different creation story, and it starts with the triple goddess that we have talked about in the last two presentations. I'm not going to go back into that. And today what we're going to look at is a double letter, which was like the Venus was a double letter. And I'll talk about that a tiny bit more for those of you who are coming in. So I think I'm going to start right away with my slideshow. So I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to choose this one, share. And I'm going to just adjust everything. Give me a sec. So, that down. And this over here. And in just 1 second, I'll be all set up. There we go. Okay. So, I realized that I haven't given anybody a map. I showed, after one of the presentations, I showed a little bit of my book and there was a map in there, but not in these recorded presentations. So I just want to give you a little idea of the area that we're looking at when we talk about the Near East. So if you see in my cursor here, this whole area from Turkey into Iran, Saudi Arabia, actually, I haven't been studying it, but even Ethiopia, which I have read some things about, very interesting, Yemen, Egypt, Israel, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, all these modern countries originally had different names, and they followed a very different way of looking at life than their ancestors did. So this area, Egypt, was called Kemet, and this Israel, Lebanon, all along the Mediterranean Sea, you had what was called Canaan. Often it was under Egyptian rule. This area, which is Syria today and Iraq, and has the Tigris and the Euphrates River that actually pour into the Persian Gulf. This was called Mesopotamia. It was very fertile, and agriculture was said to have started here. And this area of Iran, which was the Elamite Empire, was very influential also on and had a common way of looking at this experience. All these different countries, Saudi Arabia, all of these nations in our very oldest documents had the sacred feminine right in the middle, if not in the forefront of their pantheons, in their way of looking at life. You know, very different from today. So we're going to go to our first slide of tonight, or well, I guess it's the second one. And this is the letter Bet. Okay, so now I'm just going to remind you that in the Sefer Yetzirah, you have three types of letters. You have the three mothers, who are the three mothers who birth the three fathers, and they make the first three pairs. And we looked at the similar types of cosmogonies in the Near East, in the primordial mother. Then comes the seven. And with the seven, they are represented by the mouth, and then three pairs, the two eyes, the two ears, and the two nostrils. Because each letter has a manifestation in the body, in the soul, in time and space. So their body parts are the orifices into the head. And we're told also in the Sefer Yetzirah that they are portals into the soul. And we're told that at the center of these three pairs is the letter Bet, is the mouth. And she's very important. And if we read what is actually written in the Sefer Yetzirah when she's described, we're told that with Bet was formed Saturn. So Bet, when she manifests into space, she manifests as the living God, she manifests as Saturn. And as you might recall in the last presentation, each of these seven double letters represents a day of the week, just the same way the gods and goddesses did, all the way down into the Greeks and Romans. And so with Bet was formed Saturn, the Sabbath. The Sabbath is Saturday, the mouth, which I just mentioned, and life and death. So she's the portal of life and death that lies in the center of the other orifices. We have to go through her actually to get into the soul. See that. So we are going to look at goddesses that represent life and death. They're not always a grandmother. In fact, the one we're going to look at the most is Anat. And she is a Canaanite goddess that was very popular in many different cultures and nations around the area. In fact, you can see she's wearing the Atef crown, which was the crown of Osiris. So she was definitely someone that was integrated into the Egyptian pantheon as well. And if you remember with the primordial goddesses, they're all holding their breasts up and offering their just the motherness out to the world, you know. And when we get to the fertility goddess, she just has her arms open and she's holding either lotuses or snakes or wheat, but she's just wide open. And when we come, you're going to see this repeatedly tonight. When we come to both Anat and her consort Baal, the storm god, you'll see that she's very militant, and she has her, she has, they're always got their fists up. And as we know, in the double letters, they represent always something positive and something negative and something neutral, just like the mothers. So as within, so without. So they represent in them, embodied in them, these three qualities. And in the Sefer Yetzirah, each one of the double letters can experience 4 different ways of being. They can be either hateful or loving. They can be killers or life givers. And we've seen with Venus, with Inanna, that she was the queen of love, but she could also be hateful. And even though she was life-giving with all her fertility, she could also be death-giving with her barrenness. So you'll see in these, I pre-warn you that Anat is like, especially there's a chronology to the myths in the Baal cycles. And I'll be reading you the one where she kills death itself. But you'll see that in this chronology, she starts off just so entitled, and she's everything that brings about war. But because she's war, she has to be peace. So she's both, and we'll see that. So in Canaan, she was called Anat, but in Ugaritic as Anat. And she was so present in the Egyptian pantheon, and she was known as Antit, Anit, Anti, or Anat. Her father was El. El was the great god consort of Athirat or Asherah that we looked at in the Primordial Goddess. And you can see he doesn't have his hand, the way he's putting it out is a whole different gesture. And he was also known as the Great Bull, and he was known as Laptikan. And you'll hear when I quote you some of these myths, that's the name that he's often called, the kindly. He was a very kind and compassionate god, kindly Laptikan. And the mother is Athirat, who we saw in the Primordial Goddess. Look, she has her hand out in the same gesture. And both of them, you're going to see at first, are just fed up with Baal and Anat because they are just out of control. And you'll see. So here we go, Baal. So Anat's brother is named Baal. And he is not only her brother, but also her lover. And he was seen as Saturn all the way into Roman days. And of course, this is how Bet manifests, is as Saturn. So the letter always manifests the living God. So she's the energy behind Saturn, but the masculine element is Saturn in this type of thinking, in this system. Okay. So if we want to trace back Baal, where did he come from? Guess what? We go back to Sumer again. We always go back to Sumer. And in Sumer, he was called Ishkur or Isku. And he was the lord of the rain and the thunderstorms. And he's often holding lightning, as you see here, and a mace or an axe. Here he's carrying the things, but in his hands, and walking on the bull. So, and he was the son of Nana, the moon god. And if you recall, Nana is also the father of Utu and Inanna. He's the son of Venus and the sun. And in Canaanite mythology, the sun is female. But in Sumerian and Babylonian and Akkadian, He is masculine. Anyway, so we can go all the way back to Sumeria and find the roots of Baal, who was a storm god. And he was eventually adapted into the Semitic culture as Hadad, because Baal is just a title. So he was called Baal Hadad, sometimes Adad or Hadu. And he was also, of course, consistently the storm and rain god. Okay, so he was very, very popular. You can see right here the Egyptian depiction of Baal with his little hands up. You can see the Hittite representation. We talked quite a bit about the Hittites last time. And we can see the Phoenician representation. So he was somebody that was very important. And of course, he comes up in the Bible all the time, you know. And as we have seen in the previous presentations, Yahweh, who was also a warrior storm god like Baal, starts usurping his attributes. And this we went through in those last ones, but we'll see it again in tonight in different attributes. We'll see the story of Leviathan or Leviathan. So in Phoenician, the two main words for Lord are Adon and Baal. And both those got attributed to gods as their main names, just the same way Jesus is a title, and we think of Jesus now as one specific entity. So this was the same with Baal and Adon. Of course, Adonis is the one who adopted that name, and we saw that last time. So in our story tonight, what we're going to really look at with Anat is Baal Hadad, and his realm is Zephon. And you might have heard of Baal of Zephon. Well, it's the same. It's Baal Hadad. Zephon is just where he lives. And you might have also heard of Baal Zebub, who became Beelzebub, which was equated to Satan. So these of course, were definitely when Yahweh was trying to usurp these attributes of being the storm warrior god. He didn't want any Baals around. He didn't want any of those gods and goddesses. And if you've read the Bible, there's a consistent pattern of being told that they are bad and wicked and to be let go of Satan itself. Okay, well, I must say that Anat is pretty, she can get really nasty. So, but we also have Atirat, who can be very loving. So I want to look at Atirat and Anat come up in the Baal cycle, which is, we found in these texts from Ugarit, which is modern Syria. And these are in these texts, it was the first time we hear about Yahweh. They're about 1450 BCE, so about 900 years before the Bible was written down, before the Torah was inscribed. Very old tablets. And Atirat is the great goddess mother, and so therefore her daughter is, of course, Anat. You can see Anat is just not that sweet. And but before we really get into, you know, the Baal cycle itself, I want to show how Anat is, when she is talked about as Rameh, she is not considered as the war goddess, but rather just death, that she is just the opposite of Atirat. When Atirat looks up, she looks down. When she gives life, she gives death. And they're like a seesaw. And I'll read you a couple of paragraphs from a myth from the Baal cycle, the Ugaritic Baal cycle. So I'm going to bring this over into this screen. And this is just just an excerpt. I would call on the gracious gods, cleavers of the sea, children of the sea, who suck the teats of the breasts of Atirat and Rameh. And Rameh, of course, being Anat. one manifestation of Anat. May pale Shapash, who is the sun, lead them blank and to the grapes. Peace to the ministers and the guards, those who come with the sacrifice of grace. The fields of the gods, the fields of Athirat and Rameh, shall again blank. El went out to the shore of the sea and advanced to the shore of the ocean. El perceived two women moving up and down, two women moving up and down over a basin. One moved down, the other moved up. One cried, Father, Father. The other cried, Mother, Mother. The organ, or in this case, it means the sex of El, grew long as the sea, and the organ of El as the flood. The organ of El did grow long as the sea, and the organ of El as the flood. El took the two women who moved up and down. He took the two women who moved up and down over the basin. He took them and set them in his house. El did lower his scepter. El blanked the staff in his hand. He raised it and shot heavenward. He shot a bird in the heavens. He plucked it and put it on the coals. Surely El seduced the two women, saying, if the two women should cry out, O husband, husband, who have lowered your scepter, who have blank the staff in your hand, look, the bird is roasted on the fire, it is browned on the coals. The two women will be wives of El even forever. But if the two women should cry out, O Father, Father, who have lowered your scepter, who have blanked the staff in your hand, look, the bird is roasted on the fire and is browned on the coals. The two girls will be daughters of El, even forever. And behold, the two women cried out, O husband, husband, who have lowered your scepter, who have blanked the staff in your hand. Look, the bird is roasted on the fire and is browned on the coals. The two women became wives of El even forever. He stooped and kissed their lips. Behold, their lips were sweet, sweet as pomegranates. In the kissing there was conception. In the embracing there was pregnancy. They travailed and gave birth to Shachar and Shalim. Word was carried to El. The two wives of El have given birth. What did they bear? Two have been born, Shachar and Shalim. Raise and prepare an offering for Lady Shapash, who is the sun, and for the fixed stars. Once more he stooped and kissed their lips. Behold, their lips were sweet. In the kissing there was conception. In the embracing there was pregnancy. And this shall be recited again 5 times for the assembly. Both of them travailed and gave birth. They gave birth to the gracious gods, cleavers of the sea, children of the sea, who sucked the teats of the breasts of the lady. Word was carried to El. The two wives of El have given birth. What did they bear? The gracious gods, cleavers of the sea, children of the sea, who sucked the teats of the breasts of the lady. One lip reached to the earth, and one lip to the heavens. And there indeed entered their mouth the birds of the heavens and the fish from the sea. And they did stand cleaver by cleaver, or right or left they were put into their mouth. So we really see this nature of the dualism and the differences of these two goddesses. And of course, there's always in the Sefer Yetzirah, you have evil is born from good, and therefore it defines it. It's very Gnostic also, wisdom borns the evil demiurgus, wisdom Sophia. And so these are two different forces, but there's no judgment here. Whereas you're going to see that eventually Atirat is fed up with her daughter, and she's like, "God, you're so entitled." She's just like, blah, 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 blah. But that's coming in a sec. So one thing that's interesting when we look at the polarity of these two women, it made me think of the Scottish Gaelic goddesses of Brigid and Cailleach. And Cailleach, some people say that her etymology comes from Kali itself. And Kali is very close to Anat. And she also is associated with the creation of weather, of the landscape, the weather, and especially storms. So there's somewhere, with all the Indo-Europeans and the Canaans, everybody moving around, these stories, these basic essential ideas kept getting moved around. And she's the other side of Brigid, who rules the spring and the renewal of life after winter. So at the time of this Baal cycle, which is in the time of Aries, and I talked about the precession of the equinoxes in my last presentation. It's time of Aries, and it's a time when the patriarch is very much installing itself in this area. The myths have been changing, the goddesses are disappearing. And at this time, you still do have a tripartite universe. You have El in the heavens, and his two beloveds are Yam, the god of the ocean, and it used to be the goddess, but here it's the god of the ocean, and Mot, who is literally death, and the god of the underworld. So the three were, the heavens was El, Yam is the ocean, and Mot is the underworld. And Baal does not figure into this tripartite system. And he and Anat are super jealous about it. They do not like this at all. They want to be pretty central. They want to be the most important. So we have a big battle. So the first one that they're going to go after is Yam. And Yam is the seven-headed serpent of the ocean, the god of water, of the oceans. And he is the beloved of El. And in this is a Sumerian cylinder seal that we're looking at. So you can see the seven-headed serpent being attacked by two figures, and there's two weapons that are being used. We don't have a story behind that, or at least I haven't seen it. But however, in the story, in the Baal cycle, we know that Baal is helped by Kotar Kassis, which are a pair of people that go by the name Kotar Kassis, and they're kind of like this master craftsmen. They know how to sort of solve everything and put things together. And they encourage Baal and Anat to get rid of Yam and take his place as the sort of more powerful god of water, because Baal is the storm god. He brings the rains, and his daughters, he has three daughters. One is the goddess of mist, one is the goddess of showers, and one is the goddess of moisture. And he wants this to be more important than the oceans, the seas. And so Kotar Kassis encourages him to go ahead and just kill him. And that's what happens. And Kotar Kassis gives them two clubs. One is called Driver and one is called Chaser. And with Driver and Chaser, they killed Lotan, the Leviathan. If I'm saying that wrong, don't laugh. That's just another image of the seven-headed beast being attacked. And of course, we see this in the Bible. And, as I've mentioned, and definitely in the presentations before this, I've talked about Yahweh starts to usurp a lot of these stories, instead of having Baal be the center, he becomes the center, Yahweh becomes the center. And in Isaiah 27 out of the Torah, we can read, in that day, the Lord will punish with his sword, his fierce, great and powerful sword. Leviathan, the gliding serpent. Leviathan, the coiling serpent. He will slay the monster of the sea. And in Psalm 74, told, it was you who crushed the head of Leviathan and gave him as food to the creatures of the desert. So this was another story that was usurped, and the main hero was changed from Baal to Yahweh. And in fact, we have this corpus literature, it's not even literature, of texts from the 5th century BCE called the Elephantine papyri. I'm not saying that either right. Papyri. And it's a collection of things like documents, and there's contracts, there's all kinds of things. But in it, we hear Yahweh referred to as Yahu. And Yahu's consort is Anat. And so even if Yahu, because there's some people say, no, that's not exactly Yahweh, but many scholars, I just listened to yet another wonderful podcast where they were talking about this, and it really seems that Yahu is just another way of saying Yahweh or Jehovah. And he was the consort of Anat, which is, we have also seen when Asherah was the big goddess, then Yahweh had to be her consort as well. So he usurped, he's basically usurping El's position and Baal's position at the same time so that he can be the most important. But you'll see that Baal wants to get rid of El too, because he wants to be the most important. This is all this entitlement that leads to war. I need to be so important. So anyway, so I want to talk a little bit about the myth of the palace of Baal. In the palace of Baal, we find out that it's basically, you get the story of them killing Yam, the 7-headed serpent, and then it basically goes right into like a new chapter in the palace of Baal. It goes into a new chapter of Baal just rejoicing in his Zephon. He's just so happy that he's gotten rid of this beloved of El, and now he is going to be usurping that place in his eyes. And he's rejoicing, and his daughters, shower, moist, and mist. They're playing on their beautiful harps and their lyres and making music, and everything's beautiful, beautiful. But Anat is not rejoicing in the same way. And this is obviously not a picture of Anat. This is a picture of Kali, who has a necklace of heads. And you can see, with her weapons and just this terrible, it's like taking the worst of war and deifying it. But Kali is also about peace and compassion, in the same way that Anat is about peace and compassion. And but we'll find that part out in a minute. Right now, we're looking at her ferocious side. And so while Baal is celebrating the fact that Yam is dead, Anat is deep in gore and war. There are two cities that are fighting each other, and her energy is just flowing through both of them. She's like the catalyst, and she's enjoying it. And I'll quote, she fastened the heads to her back. She bound the hands to her belt. And in another part, because it's really long and it goes on and on about all the terrible things. Her liver swelled with laughter. Her heart was filled with joy. as she waded knee-deep in guards' blood, her skirts immersed in heroes' gore. This is like some really intense stuff. So, and after she does this, she goes and she purifies herself. It's as if she played the game, but now she just doesn't want it anymore. And she purifies herself and she makes herself beautiful so that she can sing to her lover Baal and his daughters. And here's a quote. She's taking her lyre in her hand, having set corals on her breasts. And she is singing of her love for Almighty Baal, her affection for Pidre, daughter of mist, her fondness for Tale, daughter of rain, her love for Arse, daughter of moisture. And it goes on, she makes peace offerings and cleans her spirits. And it's all very beautiful. You forget this was this terrible, terrible, gory creature that we just had read about. And the Phoenicians actually portrayed her as a beautiful woman pulling a chariot of 7 lions and accompanied by doves. So she was definitely the herald of peace. And you'll see through these myths that we're going to unravel right now, you know, that there is a definite lesson of life being more powerful than death. And there's one of resurrection, and also of being kind if you really want to get your way, because violence doesn't work. And that comes out in the myth. So anyway, and in fact, Baal himself is flipped out when he hears how his sister and lover Anat is going so gory. And so he gets his 2, they're gods, but they're his messengers as well. He gets Gupan and Ugar to deliver a message to Anat, to tell her to just chill. Even though she's already cleansed herself, he's like, wow, too much. And when the messengers arrive at her house, she's so uptight, she's so much on the defensive, that before she can even hear what they have to say, she's already like rattling off how powerful she is. So I'm going to quote just one verse here. She lifted up her voice and cried out, "Why have Gupan and Ugar come? What enemy has risen against Baal? What foe against the rider of clouds? Did I not destroy Yam, the favorite of El, annihilate the great god Nahar? Was not the dragon Tanin caught and finished off? I have destroyed the twisting serpent, the tyrant with 7 heads, destroyed Arsh, the favorite of the gods, silenced Atik, the bull calf of El, destroyed Ishat, the bitch of the gods." And it just keeps on going on and on and on about all these people she's killed, or gods and goddesses she's killed. And finally, she asks, which foe of Baal dares to enter the house? And Gupan and Ugar finally have a little space to respond. And they say, no foe rises against Baal. And she calms down and she listens to his message. And his message is very beautiful. She's told to put an offering of loaves of bread in the earth. Set mandrakes, which were seductive and magical roots, seemed that way. Set mandrakes in the ground. Pour a peace offering in the heart of the earth. Honey from a pot in the heart of the earth. Make haste, be resolute, hurry on. Let your feet run towards me, for I have a tale that I would tell you. The word of the tree and the whisper of the stone. the murmur of the heavens to the earth, of the seas to the stars. I understand the lightning that the heavens do not know, a tale that mankind does not know, nor do the multitudes of the earth understand. Come, and I myself will search it out. Within my rock El Zephon, in my holy place, in the rock of my heritage, in my pleasant place, in the hill of my victory. And Anat is indeed moved by these words. And in these poems, these verses get repeated a lot. And so she repeats back to them, should I really do this? And they repeat, yes, you have to do this. And so then she does it. And then she sets out to meet Baal. And I'm going to quote again. Then indeed she set her face towards Baal in the heights of Zephon, across 1,000 tracks, the 1,000 spaces. Baal sighted his sister coming, the swift approach of his father's daughter-in-law. He did remove the women from his presence, and he did set an ox before her, a fatling too in front of her. She scooped up water and washed herself, dew of heaven and oil of earth, dew that the heavens poured upon her, showers that the stars did pour upon her. She set off her beauty with the murex, whose source is 1,000 tracks away in the sea, with dew, and then we lose the rest of the tablet. It's damaged. And I wish I could say that it all stayed all peaceful, sweet, and loving like that for a long time, but it doesn't last much. Because after a while, when they start talking, he starts getting entitled again, and he's like, hey, how come I don't have a unique house? And that, he just resides in the house of his father, and his daughters reside in the house of their mother, Atirat, and they should be with him in his own unique house. And we get a verse that's repeated many times, which is very integral and important to this particular myth. And it goes like this. But there is not a house for Baal like the gods, nor a court like the sons of Atirat. The dwelling of El is his son's shelter. The dwelling of Dame Atirat of the sea is the dwelling of Pidre, daughter of mist. The shelter of Tale, daughter of showers. The dwelling of Arse, daughter of moisture. The dwelling of the noble brides. And this just gets Anat furious. She gets all worked up, and she threatens to go see their father, El. Bull, El, my father, will listen to me. He will listen to me when I tell him that I will throw him to the ground like a lamb. I will make his gray hairs run with blood, the gray hairs of his beard with gore, if he will not give Baal a house like the other gods, a court like the sons of Atirat. She stamped her foot and the earth shook. It's also translated, she stamped her foot and traveled over the earth. And she does, she goes to El. She goes to El, who lives in the mountain between, at the source of the two oceans, where the two streams meet. And she does, she threatens him, just like she said she would. And he answers, I know, daughter, that you are like men, and there exists not among goddesses contempt like yours. Depart, daughter, haughty is your heart. You take what is in your mind, you carry out what is in your breast. He who hinders you shall be utterly struck down. And basically, he goes on to just say, well, I can't do anything about it anyway, because at the end of the day, you're just going to do what you want, and you're going to strike down anybody who's going to try to stop you. So they actually come to terms, and he doesn't say that he's going to give anything to Baal. And it's not just to Baal, it's to Baal and Anat. They come as a pair. But he does give them advice. And she becomes sweet as honey as soon as he's nice with her and says, your decree, El, is wise. Your wisdom is everlasting. A life of good fortune is your decree. Mightiest Baal is our king, our judge over whom there is none. We too would carry his chalice. We too would carry his cup. And, but like I said, he doesn't give them, just the house and this dominion. He basically tells them to go to Kotar, the pair of master craftsmen, and to tell them the problem. And they tell Baal and Anat to just chill out, that they should just go about this in a totally different way, that they should go back and talk to their mother, Atirat. But when they approach her, because right now she's just fed up with them, and when they approach her, they should bring her gifts. And there are verse after verse of all the gifts that Baal and Anat start making to appease and please their mother. So instead of this, we're going to go and threaten to bring gore and turn your hair white and do all these terrible things, instead of using threats, Kotar tells them that they need to bring offerings and gifts. And indeed, it was clever, because as soon as Atirat sees them show up, she's immediately flips out, because she's like, oh my God, these troublemakers. But then she sees all these incredible gifts and offerings and everything else. And because of that, she totally chills out and starts listening to them. And she really listens to their case of why it's important that the storm god gets a house of his own. And they convince her. When they were gentle, they convince her. And so she goes back to El, and El is super happy to see her at first. He's like ready to make love with her, and oh, it's just like he's like so happy she's there. And she has to tell him that actually she's coming back to talk to him again about Baal and Anat and the need for him to have his own house and his own court. And El is just like, oh my God, what a drag. And he goes, so I am a slave, a lackey of Atirat. So I am a slave to handle the trowel, seeing that Atirat is a slave girl to mold the bricks. So let a house be built for Baal. So he cedes, he's annoyed. He's like, oh God, we're just going to cave in and do what he wants. But Atirat doesn't feel like she was a slave to anything. She had been convinced. It made sense to her. And so she declares and says to El, now at last, Baal may appoint a time for rain, a time for his bark to appear in the snow, and for the sounding of his voice in the clouds, for him to release his lightning on the earth. So she understood. She understood that this was necessary, but for her to hear it, it had to be told to her gently and not in that violent, entitled, pushy way that they had been doing it in the beginning. And so Well, when Anat hears that he's going to be able to get his own house and his own court, she is thrilled, and she runs back to Baal to tell him the good news. Be gladdened, Baal, I bring you good tidings. A house shall be built for you like your brothers, and a court like your kinsfolk. Then lots of elaboration is made in this myth about how magnificent this house is going to be made. It's going to be made of cedar and silver and gold, and even though it's so lavish and so nice and so beautiful, this great big palace, it's not enough. You never have enough power, I guess, if you're looking for it, that kind of power. And Baal thinks, actually, I kind of want my dad out of the way. He's definitely in my way. And he decides to send a courier, a letter to death itself. And he sends, and I'll quote you, I will send a courier to divine Mot, a herald to the hero beloved of El, because Mot is the beloved of El, to ask that Mot invite him, meaning invite El, to ask that Mot invite him into his throat, that the beloved one hide him within himself. For I alone am he that is king over the gods, that indeed fatten gods and men, that satisfied the multitudes of the earth. So he wrote that letter to Mot explaining that daddy had to go and that he alone was king over the gods. And he sent his two courier gods, Upin and Ugar, and told them not to get too close because that Mot had a big mouth and could eat everything that was in its vicinity. So now this particular myth of Baal and Mot being death, is important enough, I think, to read you the myth. And it's an amazing myth. So rather than just quoting it, there's some parts of it, the text is damaged, so I just skip over that rather than reading fragments of words. But we can definitely piece it together with what we have. Okay, so let me just see. Back into my book and get the right page up. And so this is called Baal and Mot. Okay, so like I said, these myths work like chapters in a big story. And so the myth of Baal and Mot is actually, you have the two messenger gods who are going to be bringing, which have brought this message to Mot, and this is the response. This is how Mot responds to the messenger gods. This is his message for them to bring back to Baal. Have you then forgotten, Baal, that I can surely transfix you, blank you, for all that you smote Leviathan, the slippery serpent, and made an end of the wiggling serpent, the tyrant with 7 heads. The heavens will burn up and droop helpless, for I myself will crush you in pieces. I will eat you, blank, and forearms. Indeed, you must come down into the throat of divine Mot, into the miry depths of the hero beloved of El. The gods, meaning the two messenger gods, did depart and stayed not. They set their faces towards Baal in the heights of Zephon, and Gupin and Ugar gave him the answer. The message of divine Mot, the word of the hero beloved of El is this: but my appetite is an appetite of lions in the waste, just as the longing of dolphins is in the sea, or a pool captivates wild oxen, or a spring, as it were, herds of hinds. If it is in very truth my desire to consume clay, now that comes from the idea that everything in the material world is made from clay. If it is in very truth my desire to consume clay, then in truth by the handfuls I must eat it. Whether my 7 portions are already in the bowl, or whether Nahar, who is someone associated with the Leviathan, maybe the Leviathan himself. So whether my 7 portions are already in the bowl, or whether Leviathan has to mix the cup. So Baal has invited me with my brothers, and Hadad has called me with my kinsfolk. But it is to eat bread with my brothers and to drink wine with my kinsfolk. Because Hadad has invited him to come to the home and then eat up El and have a good feast with him. He says, Hadad has called me with my kinsfolk, but it is to eat bread with my brothers and to drink wine with my kinsfolk. Have you then forgotten, Baal, that I can surely transfix you, blank you, for all that you smote Leviathan, the slippery serpent, and made an end of the wiggling serpent, the tyrant with 7 heads? Well, the heavens will burn up and droop helpless, for I myself will crush you in pieces. I will eat you blank and forearms. Indeed, you must come down into the throat of divine Ma'at, into the miry depths of the hero beloved of El. And we're missing some lines here, but we go on to hear a description of Ma'at, the great mouth. A lip to the earth, a lip to the heavens, a tongue to the stars. Baal must enter his innards and go down into his mouth, because he has scorched the olives, the produce of the earth and the fruit of the trees. Mightiest Baal is afraid of him. The rider on the clouds is in dread of him. Depart, tell to divine Ma'at, repeat to the hero beloved of El, the message of mightiest Baal. The word of the mightiest of warriors is this: Hail, O divine Ma'at, I am your servant, yes, yours forever. That's the message he's giving back to his 2 messengers to give back to Ma'at after hearing his. He gets super scared and says, go back and say, I'm your servant. The gods did depart and stayed not. They set their faces towards divine Ma'at, within his city miry, where a pit is the throne on which he sits. Filth, the land of his heritage. They lifted up their voices and cried, the message of mightiest Baal, the word of the mightiest of warriors is this: Hail, divine Ma'at, I am your servant, yes, yours forever. Divine Ma'at did rejoice. He lifted up his voice and cried, how is it that Baal invites me with my brothers? How is it that Hadad calls me with my kinsfolk? And then we miss a whole bunch of lines, but we get in there, my bread, basically, based on the other stuff that we've just heard, it sounds like he is being, Baal has said, I will be your servant, but he's also been invited. He's still invited Ma'at to come to his home, to his new palace, his new home. So let's see. just find out where it's. I get it's very, very broken up. So I'm just going to come here. We're missing a couple pages here, but what ends up happening is that Baal does come. I mean, Mot does go to Baal's home, and he lifted. This is Mot, and he lifted up his voice and he cried, "Where then is Baal? Where is Hadad?" Baal arose with his 7 pages, with his 8 boars. He came near blank, food blank, while the gods did eat and drink, and they were supplied with the suckling of the teat. With a salted knife they did carve a fatling. They did drink flagons of wine from cups of gold, the blood of trees from cups of silver. Flagons, and they went, okay, so it's very choppy here because most of it's broken up. I mean, we're missing the lines. But when we get it back again, so that it's, Mot has been actually talking to Baal, and they've been talking about a calf. And if you understand it, once I read the whole myth, I sort of put pieces together. It seems like Mot is explaining now. He's trying to transfix Baal and explain to him what he must do, because he says, I will put him in a hole of the earth gods. And so he addresses Baal and he says, and as for you, take your clouds, your winds, your thunderbolts and your rain. Take with you your 7 pages and your 8 boars. Take with you Pidre, daughter of mists. Take with you Tale, daughter of showers. Then of a truth do you set your face towards the rock at the entrance of my grave. Lift up a rock on your 2 hands, a wooded height onto your 2 palms, and go down into the house of freedom in the earth. Be counted amongst those who go down into the earth. And do you know, inanition like mortal men, mightiest Baal obeyed. He loved a heifer in the pasture, a cow in the fields by the shore of the realm of death. He did lie with her 77 times. She allowed him to mount 80 times. And she conceived and gave birth to a boy. Mightiest Baal did clothe him with his robe, blank him as a gift for the beloved one, blank to his breast. Then indeed they set their faces towards, now this is a new column, so it's, actually it's hard, it sounds like they being the 2 messengers. Then indeed they set their faces towards El at the source of the rivers, amid the springs of the 2 oceans. They penetrated the mountains of El and entered the massif of the king, the father of time. They lifted up their voices and cried, we too did go round to the edges of the earth, to the limits of the watery region. We too did reach pleasure, the land of pasture, delight, the fields by the shore of the realm of death. We too did happen upon Baal. He had fallen to the ground. Mightiest Baal is dead. The Prince Lord of Earth has perished. Thereupon Latipan is another name for El. Thereupon Latipan, kindly God, did come down from his throne and did sit on the footstool. And he did come down from the footstool and did sit on the ground. And he poured straw of mourning on his head, dust of wallowing on his crown. For clothing he covered himself with sackcloth. He scraped his skin with a stone. With a flint for a razor he shaved his side whiskers and beard. He harrowed his collarbone. He plowed his chest like a garden. He harrowed his waist like a valley. And he lifted up his voice and he cried, Baal is dead. What will become of the people of Dagon's son? What of his multitudes? After Baal, I would go down into the earth. Then Anat also went to and fro and scoured every rock to the heart of the earth, every hill to the heart of the fields. She reached pleasure, the land of pastures, delight, the fields by the shore of the realm of death. She happened upon Baal. He had fallen to the ground. For clothing, she covered herself with sackcloth. Of Baal, she scraped her skin with a stone. With a flint for a razor, she shaved her side whiskers and beard. No, she could have a beard. She harrowed her collarbone. She plowed her chest like a garden. She harrowed her waist like a valley, saying, Baal is dead. What will become of the people of Dagon's son? What of his multitudes? After Baal, we would go down into the earth. Shapash, who is the sun goddess, Shapash, the luminary of the gods, came down to her as she sated herself with weeping, and she drank tears like wine. She cried aloud to Shapash, the luminary of the gods, hoist, I beseech you, mightiest Baal, onto me. Shapash, the luminary of the gods, obeyed. She lifted up mightiest Baal. She surely put him on the shoulders of Anat, and she took him up to the recesses of Zephon. She wept for him and buried him. She put him in a hole of the earth gods. She slew 70 wild oxen as a blank for mightiest Baal. We're missing a bunch of lines, but we know that she slew 70 oxen, 70 sheep, 70 harts, 70 mountain goats, 70 asses, and she put his blank into a blank him as befitted as brother-in-law of the gods. So they do all the necessary funeral rites. Then indeed she set her face towards El at the source of the river, amid the springs of the two oceans. She penetrated the mountain of El and entered the massif of the king, father of years. She did homage at the feet of El and fell down. She prostrated herself and did him honor. A little different from earlier. She lifted up her voice and cried, but she's still going to be a little nasty because this is a little bit of sarcasm here. She goes, now let Athirat and her sons rejoice. Elat in the company of her kinsfolk, for mightiest Baal is dead, for the prince lord of earth has perished. El cried aloud to Dame Athirat of the sea, hear, O Dame Athirat of the sea, give one of your sons that I may make him king. And Dame Athirat of the sea answered, yet let us make him a king that has knowledge and intelligence. But Latipan, kindly God, answered, one feeble in strength cannot run like Baal, nor release the lance like Dagon's son when the time is right. But Dame Athirat of the sea did answer, no, let us make Athtar, the terrible king. Let Athtar, the terrible, be king. Thereupon Athtar the terrible went up into the recesses of Zephon. He sat on the seat of mightiest Baal, but his feet did not reach the footstool, and his head did not reach its top. And Athtar the terrible spoke, I cannot be king in the recesses of Zephon. Athtar the terrible came down. He came down from the seat of mightiest Baal and became king over the whole broad earth. And then it talks about some of the ritual that is done, but most of it's broken up, unfortunately. Days passed, and the damsel Anat sought him, like the heart of a heifer yearning for her calf, like the heart of a ewe learning for her lamb. So the heart of Anat yearned after Baal. She seized Mot by the hem of his garment. She constrained him by the end of his robe. She lifted up her voice and cried, "Do you, Mot, give up my brother?" But Divine Mot did not answer. But Divine Mot did answer. "What is it that you desire of me, O Virgin Anat? I myself went to and fro and scoured every rock to the heart of the earth, every hill to the heart of the fields. My appetite did lack humans. My appetite did lack the multitudes of earth. I did reach pleasure the land of pasture, delight the field by the shore of the realm of death. I it was who confronted mightiest Baal, I who made him like a lamb in my mouth. He was carried away like a kid in the breach of my windpipe." Now, this is going to continue, but we jump because what happens is Anat obviously must just like, okay, well, he's not going to help me. And it turns to this new verse. So Shapash, the luminary of the gods, the sun goddess, did glow hot. The heavens were wearied by the hand of divine Mot. Days passed. From days they passed into months, as the damsel Anat sought him, like the heart of a heifer yearning for her calf, like the heart of a ewe yearning for her lamb. So the heart of Anat yearned after Baal. And then she gets fed up. She seized divine Mot. With a sword she split him. With a sieve she winnowed him. With fire she burnt him. With millstones she ground him. In a field she scattered him. His flesh indeed the birds ate. His limbs indeed the sparrows consumed. Flesh cried out to flesh. And then we jump to the next column. For Mot has perished, blank. And if mightiest Baal is alive, and if the Prince Lord of Earth exists. Okay, I'm sorry. Because this is confusing, because we just jump into it, I have to just point out, this is Anat speaking. Anat realizes that if she has been able to kill death itself, then it means that Baal can be resurrected. He must have life because Mot is no longer ruler over him. So she's speaking to El now. I know it just jumps into this. And since I've read it already, I can tell you, she's speaking to him and saying these things. So, for Mot has perished, and if mightiest Baal is alive, and if the Prince Lord of Earth exists, then in a dream of Latipan, kindly God, in a vision of the Creator of creatures, the heavens should rain oil, the ravines should run with honey, that I may know that mightiest Baal is alive, that the Prince Lord of Earth exists. So she gives this prophetic, this prophecy that if El has this dream, if Latipan has this dream, then it will mean that Baal is really alive, that by killing Mot, she has resurrected him. And he does. In a dream of Latipan, kindly God, in a vision of the Creator of creatures, the heavens rained oil, the ravines ran with honey, and Latipan, kindly God, did rejoice. He placed his feet on the footstool and parted his throat and laughed. He lifted up his voice and cried, "Even I may sit down and be at ease, and my soul within me may take its ease, For mightiest Baal is alive, for the Prince Lord of Earth exists. El cried aloud to the Virgin Anat, "Hear, O Virgin Anat, tell to Shapash, the luminary of the gods." So this is what she's supposed to tell him in a new column. And what she's explaining here is that because Baal has been gone, they've had this terrible drought, and the furrows, the cracks in the earth are just like, just give me water. And so she is supposed to bring a message to Shapash, the sun goddess, that Baal has to be found now, quick. He's resurrected, but he has to be brought into his house so he can do his work. So the furrows in the fields are cracked, O Shapash. The furrows in the fields of El are cracked. Baal should be occupying the furrows in the plowland. Where is mightiest Baal? Where is the Prince Lord of Earth? The Virgin Anat departed. Then indeed she set her face towards Shapash, the luminary of the gods. She lifted up her voice and cried, "The message of the bull El, your father, the word of Lapitan, your sire, is this. The furrows in the fields are cracked, O Shapash. The furrows in the fields of El are cracked. Baal should be occupying the furrows in the plowland. Where is mightiest Baal? Where is the Prince, Lord of Earth?" And Shapash, the luminary of the gods, answered, "Pour sparkling wine from a vat. Let the children of your family wear wreaths, and I will seek mightiest Baal." So here, obviously, we see a type of, one of the festivities that happened was, to celebrate his resurrection, the return of the storm season, the rainy seasons. And so fill your glasses with wine and put wreaths of flowers on the children's heads because he's coming back. Baal with his rains will come back. And the Virgin Anat answered, "Where and whither you go, O Shapash, where and whither you go, may El protect you. May blank protect you. Let sparkling wine be poured from a vat." And then we lose the lines. And when we come back, we see that Baal has still got this entitled, nasty, violent side to him, because as he comes back and re-inherits his house, he seized the sons of Athirat. He smote the great ones with the broadsword. He smote the pounders of the sea with the mace. He dragged the yellow ones of Mot to the ground. And then did Baal sit upon the throne of his kingdom, on the cushion, on the seat of his dominion. Days passed. From days they passed into months, and from months into years. And then in the 7th year, divine Mot, blank to mightiest Baal, he lifted up his voice and cried, "Because of you, Baal, I have suffered abasement. Because of you, I have suffered splitting with the sword. Because of you, I have suffered burning with fire. Because of you, I have suffered grinding with millstones. Because of you, I have suffered winnowing with the riddle. Because of you, I have suffered blank in the fields. And because of you, I have suffered scattering in the seas. Give one of your brothers that I may be fed, and the anger that I feel will turn back. But if you do not give one of your brothers, behold, I shall consume mankind. I shall consume the multitudes on earth." Now we have to remember this is a very tricky little thing, because obviously Baal and Mot are brothers if their father is El, right? And I don't know if this is the intention. Already, first of all, we lose a whole bunch of lines. And then we find out that Baal has decided to give him a brother And we will see how Mot reacts to it. Let divine Mot, let him eat his 7 pages. And divine Mot answered, but look, Baal has given me my own brothers to eat, the sons of my mother to consume. He returned to Baal in the recesses of Zephon. He lifted up his voice and cried, you have given me my own brothers, Baal, to eat, the sons of my mother to consume. They eyed each other like burning coals. Mot was strong. Baal was strong. They gored like wild oxen. Mot was strong. Baal was strong. They bit like serpents. Mot was strong. Baal was strong. They tugged like greyhounds. Mot fell down and Baal fell down on top of him. Shapaj cried out to Mot, here, I beseech you, O divine Mot, how can you fight with mightiest Baal? How of a truth shall the bull El, your father, hear you? Indeed, he will pull up the support of your seat. Indeed, he will overturn the throne of your kingdom. Indeed, will break the scepter of your rule. Divine Mot was afraid. The hero beloved of El was in dread. Mot roused himself at her call. He lifted his voice and cried, let them seat Baal on the throne of his kingdom, on the cushion on the seat of his dominion. Then we miss a bunch of lines. Do you indeed betake yourself to the fresh meat? Yes, do you indeed eat the bread of contribution? Do you indeed drink the wine of oblation? Shapash, the shades are under you. Shapash, the ghosts are under you. The gods come to you. Behold, the dead come to you. Kotar is your companion and Cassis your intimate. In the sea are Arshan dragons. Let Kotar and Cassis banish them. Let Kotar and Cassis drive them away. So there we go. That's the story of Baal and Mot. And we can see that, Anat is the one that is able to just put Mot down long enough that she can resurrect him. We can't get rid of death. Life defines death. Life comes with death, like we see with the letter Bet. Life and death are a team, just the same way war and peace are a team. You need a very dark night for a star to sparkle. So I want to just address one other myth. This one I'm not going to read. They're very long, these myths, considering, some of the mythology out there is much shorter, like the Sumerian mythology. So, but this one, this little picture of this snake-like goddess has, I don't even know where she's from. She looks Greco-Egyptian almost. I'm putting her in here because in this tale, there is a maiden who looks with serpent eyes, and I needed a picture, and she was pretty cool, so I put her in there. So this, the reason I want to just touch on this slightly before we go on to other goddesses is that in this myth, we see in the myth of Akat, we get the lesson that life is again more important than death, which is what we just got, showing that even though Mot is brought back, he is still, the ruler is life. The ruler is not death. And here, the warrior is being put into question. So it's interesting that Anat will put the warrior into question because she is a warrior, but she is a divine warrior, and Akkad is not divine, but he came about by divine intervention. He was born through divine intervention. And the story of Akkad starts with this mortal maiden who is giving this big feast for Akkad and the gods. And at one point, she gets annoyed, and her eyes, like a serpent that hisses to the earth. Her cup she hurled to the ground. She lifted up her voice and cried, "Here, I beseech you, hero Akat, ask silver, and I will give it to you. Gold, and I will bestow it on you. But give your bow to Anat. Let the sister-in-law of the peoples take your arrows." Anat totally agrees with this whole idea, and she pleads the case as well. She says, "Ask life, O hero Akat. Ask life, and I will give it to you. Immortality, and I will bestow it on you. I will cause you to count the years with Baal. With the sons of El, you shall count the months, as if he were Baal when he comes alive. When men feast on the living one, feast and give him drink, and the minstrel chants and sings over him, so will even I give life to Akat." The great warrior calls her a liar. And he says, "Yeah, right. And anyway, girls can't be warriors." That's in a nutshell, but that's what he tells her. And wow, that really pisses her off. And she says, "If I ever meet you on the path of transgression or on the path of presumption, I shall fell you beneath my very own feet. You charming, strongest one of men." And she planted her feet, and the earth did quake. And since it was El who brought about his existence through divine intervention, she has to go to El to ask if she can get rid of this terrible guy. She's mad now. And El gives the same line we already heard in the myth on the palace, where he says, basically, "You know what? You're going to do whatever you want anyway, because nobody can stand in your way. You've got your temperament lacks compassion, and you're just like, you just fly with things. So what am I going to do about it?" But it's kind of like in the last myth, it's kind of an okay. Like, what am I going to do about it? Just go for it. So she does, and she kills Akat. And when she does, she wept for him, saying, "Woe to you, Akat. Life for you I myself would have created, but for your bow I smote you. For your arrows you do not live." So this for me is a real live by the sword, die by the sword kind of myth. This warrior, the greatest warrior on earth, according to the myth, the greatest warrior was killed because he chose death over life. He did not trust. He did not believe. He had no faith that she could do that she could give him that. The warrior element of Anat was completely appreciated by the warrior pharaohs of the 16th century BCE. They really took her into the pantheon, and even Ramses later in the 13th century BCE made her a protector deity. And you can see she has the hat of Osiris and her arm, of course, up. And this is Anat seen through the eyes of the Egyptians. And in the mid-second millennium, we start getting these, what are called the Stele of Katesh. Now, if you remember the primordial goddess, if you saw that presentation, we found the primordial goddess, the Holy One, the Virgin that brings about life, who is Nate, was called Katesh. And, comes from the root kadosh. And These stells of Katesh included Atirat and her two daughters, Anat and Astarte. So Inanna and Astarte is like Inanna, Venus, the goddess of fertility. And at one point, the two sisters are given to Set during the battle of Horus and Set. You can see that happening here. She's standing on the lion. You can see it here. There were many versions of this. And so Anat is the third goddess seen in these Katesh stells. And I'm just looking at my notes real quick. But it's something I already said in the last thing about him being given, about her being given to Set, which I mentioned. So, oh, I know it's important here. If you look at her face, what they did was they took the three goddesses and they morphed them into one. And we see this in tributes on some of the stels. And where it lists their three names, Katesh, Anat, Astarte. And they morphed them into one with the head of Hathor. And Hathor is the great Egyptian goddess, the cow goddess. And and Hathor, here we can see her here. We can see how clearly she resembles Katesh. Katesh being the symbiosis of these three goddesses from Canaan. And Hathor herself, through mythology, we find out that she is the mother, the daughter, and the wife of Ra, the great sun god. So again, embodied in there, you have the trinity of the mother, the primordial mother, the goddess of fertility, and the goddess of death. So those three goddesses, primordial goddess, the one that maintains the fertility, and the one that brings death and rebirth, are all embodied in this image of Hathor, who also has, and I haven't read lots on Hathor. I know that there's some great books that have been recommended to me, and I'm very excited to learn more about her. But just in that information in itself is so interesting as we see why she ties into this triple goddess, because she's very much a triple goddess. And she starts usurping a lot of Isis's powers, of course, you know, as we've seen in these last presentation, everybody sort of usurps and the attributes of each other. So here we come to the last manifestation of in the region that I have, and this is Manat. So we've been talking about the Arabian goddesses in the last presentations. As the primordial goddess, she's known as Alat. As Venus, she's known as Al-Uzza. And as the goddess of death, she's known as Manat, which sounds a lot like Anat, but it's different. And so Manat was also called Manawat by the Nabateans and Manawayat. And even now, as I mentioned before in my other presentations, all of the sculptures and all of the artwork that depicted the ancient people of that area before Islam was destroyed at the advent of Islam. We have some historical historians, and we have very important, we have a book, the Book of Idols by Ibn al-Khalibi. And he was able to document their customs and what they were doing at the time when Islam was having its holy wars. And he says that Manat was the most ancient of all these three goddesses. And her name, you know, this, I don't know if that's the case in Canaan or in Sumer, you know, but according to Ibn al-Kalbi, he said that she was the most ancient. The name Manat itself comes from the Arabic mania, manawayat, mania, and that literally means death, destruction, doom, or fate. And her symbols are the waning moon and the cup of death. So we definitely do have in her the goddess of death. In Al-Uzza, we definitely have the goddess of Venus, and in Alat, the supreme primordial goddess, the great mother. So these three goddesses were celebrated at the Kaaba. The Kaaba is the main area of the main mecca for Islam. This is where people from all over the world come to circle this great stone. Now, this particular tradition of circling this great big stone goes back way before Islam, and I've mentioned that in my other presentations. And in the Book of Idols, we can read that the Quraysh, who are the most local of the tribes, that they used to circumambulate the Kaaba. I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time. I need to drink more water. And so they would circle the Kaaba and they would say, by Alat and Al-Uzza and Al-Manat, the third idol besides, verily, they are the Numidian Cranes. So the Numidian Cranes has also been translated as the holy ones, or the holy women, or the most beautiful ones. So these three goddesses, which he calls idols, of course, because, this was during the holy wars. And these three are so threatening to Muhammad that he doesn't even deal with the gods of their tribes. He just deals with the goddesses of the tribes. And they're so threatening to Muhammad at the time that we find in Al-Tabari's history, volume 6 of the Tariq, which was written in around 915. So it's written after these events took place, but he makes references to older historians, older Islamic historians. So in Al-Tabari's history of the Tariq, he relates the original and oldest version told by Muhammad ibn Ka'b went like this. Muhammad was trying to regain the popularity of the Quraysh tribes, and they would not let go of their triple goddess. And so when they are discussing this, God asks Muhammad if he knows these goddesses. And Muhammad replies that they are the Numidian Cranes. And it is said that Satan put these words into his mouth because, of course, Muhammad could not have made such a terrible mistake. And I can actually quote you this. When Muhammad, reached God's words, have you seen Alat and Al-Uzza and Manat, the third, the other? Satan cast upon his tongue because of what he had pondered in himself and longed to bring to his people. These are the high-flying cranes, and their intercession is to be hoped for. So, yes, they were very, very, very important, and it was a tricky business trying to get rid of them. Herodotus, the great Persian historian from the 5th century BCE, so this is much earlier history, said that the gods of the Arabs were basically in pairs, like we saw in the Sefer Yetzirah, the 3 pairs. Everything was in pairs. There's a god and a goddess. So there's a spirit and the manifestation of that spirit. And he said, that they were basically pairs as well. And the 19th century biblical scholar and professor of divinity, William Robertson Smith, said, and to quote him, in Arabian religion, a goddess and a god were paired, the goddess being supreme, the god her son being a lesser deity. Gradually, there was a change whereby the attributes of the goddess were presented to the god, thus lowering the position of the female below the male. So what's very interesting here is that the goddess would birth her consort. And as we saw in the other presentations, this is what happens in the Sefer Yetzirah. The goddess births her own consort. For the three mothers, they birth their own consorts. Okay, so very interesting. What's inside the Kaaba? It's this incredible black aniconic stone, which is supposed to have even maybe been meteoritic. I don't know enough about it to give you an opinion. I've heard a little of both sides, but either way, this very, very important stone is in the middle of that big black box that people go to and circumambulate. And this stone was the house. It housed the old woman. This was the house of Manat. And as you can see, now this is a newer encasing, but I've seen pictures of the old encasing and they always look like a female sex. They're in the form of a yoni. And originally, only the women could take care of this area and take care of the stone. And as the patriarch moved in, it was taken over by male priests, and they called themselves the Beni Sheban, the sons of the old woman. So you can see that there is, despite great patriarchy today, there is traces of the divine feminine. Ultimately, in Arabian culture back then, there was a beautiful balance, and that's what I'm looking for personally. This is the last of my slides, and I think that ultimately we need to find balance between the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine, so one side doesn't feel like they're getting the short end of the deal. And so just a last mention on these three goddesses that I used for the posters. Alicia had wondered in one of these presentations about some of my dreams. And I painted this painting about 10 years before I discovered the Sefer Yetzirah. And yes, of course, I knew about the triple goddess, and she's in the stance of Kali. You have the rising moon, the full moon, and the waning moon. But what I didn't know about, and what was completely intuitive, was that in the beginning you had, in the three aspects of this triple goddess, you had breath, fire, and water. And that was something that came completely intuitively. And she also came to me, Bridget, in a dream, and Bridget being the counterpart to Kaliach, who we saw at the very beginning of the presentation. So there we go. That was Anat and Baal, especially Anat and Baal. That was mostly about them, but very interesting how we can see our human psyche illustrate these sort of very profound ideas, but through this sort of very human drama. Even though it's mythical, it's very human. You have these sort of aspects we can all understand. So I'm going to stop my share, and voila.
Bravo, Liba.
Merci.
Thank you so much. I mean, I feel like I could, like, some of the stories that you share, it's like there's something that feels very familiar, or like even like about the tone, or maybe it's the way you read them, but like the stories feel like they're in there,
Yeah, they
and so
are.
yeah.
That's why I think they can come through our paintings. I've talked to Emma, I've talked to Martina, I've talked to other artists who have definitely had that thing where they'll paint something intuitively and find out later that it's a myth and there's a story. And it's like we have these in our cellular memory. These are stories that are in the library that is accessible to us all. Because we are one, we have access to that same central database of information that's in the ethers. It's intense though. Anat is intense when you start having to read through, and especially in the beginning where she's so violent and you're like, oh, but it's to show us she can't get anywhere. She needs to be nice before she gets the palace.
Yeah, does anybody have any questions for Lisa?
Why don't I let you guys stew on it and we take a pee break, because all that water is definitely doing its trick.
Sounds good.